right, here we go. And I'm going to start recording on my phone too. See, hopefully that phone has enough memory for this. All right.
All right, here we go.
Go ahead.
All right, so we're going to start. Okay. All right. Hi, everyone, and welcome. This is Pop Culture and the Law presented by the Matus Law Group, and we're very excited. I am Kristine Matus.
And this is Kristine Carranceja-Gurski.
And really, we're all so happy that you get to join us. This is really our first episode of this podcast, and it's going to be fun. We're going to be talking about pop culture and the law, anything that we've heard about or seen about in movies and TV, things that we've seen in magazines, and looking at the portrayal of legal matters and really finding out, what are the main issues regarding those podcasts and all those entertainment things that we've seen in the news, but also finding out what's accurate, what is real, and what's been fictionalized, what's been made up. And I really, to talk about and maybe educate, and have a little fun with it. I'm just happy to be able to do this with Kristine, who I've known, we've known each other for a while now, right?
At least 5 years now.
At least 5 years. That's right.
Yeah.
So knowing each other around, certain circles through friends, and now really working literally side by side with each other. So, which is awesome.
Office is right next door, folks. That's all I have.
The one thing I noticed with you, Chris, is that you do have similar likes in movies with me, things that we've seen, things we've read. Even music. Really, I've seen your taste in music. I'm like, I like them too. So
and comics, and comic books.
And comic books. That's gonna be a whole other podcast series.
Definitely.
But all right. Well, yeah. So anyway, in this first episode, go ahead, Chris. Maybe you can tell listeners what we're going to be talking about.
Absolutely. So in this episode, we're going to be talking about this Netflix movie that I just recently found out about. It's called I Care a Lot. So let's talk about the basics that you need to know about this movie. It's about a professional guardian. Her name is Marla Grayson. She's a court-appointed guardian for dozens of elderly people whose assets she seizes through what somewhat dubious means, but they're apparently legal because that's what a guardian does. So she places these elderly people in an assisted living facility where she has a relationship with the people at the assisted living facility. They kind of, do what she says, which is, a little frightening, right? Yeah. So the elderly, wards, that's what happens when you're a guardian, you have a ward. They're sedated at times, and she makes sure that they lose contact with the outside world, with their families, so that she controls them. So that's a little creepy in that regard, right?
And can I say what I didn't like is just so much control.
Yeah.
That underlying theme of the money exchanging hands. Okay. So
So it was really disturbing in the very beginning. I remember watching it with my husband. We were both very unsettled because we hate this idea of people taking advantage of other people. But we had to step back and say, fiction, fiction, fiction. So anyhow, Marla Grayson, she then, part of the process of the guardianship, she sells off their homes, their assets, and she bills them for every minute that she's working on them. She's doing, she goes through this process of making sure that the money is really spent by her in the means that she needs to be spending them. So things get complicated when she targets this elderly and wealthy retired woman, but it turns out that this woman has connections with the mob. And sure enough, the movie turns into a con artist meets drug lord, and it turns into somewhat of an action film toward the end. But here, I'll tell you what happened in the end, because that was really surprising, sort of.
That's where it actually got fun. Like where it got fun is where you're like, they picked the wrong woman.
I know, they messed with the wrong woman. And in certain parts of the movie, she was like, you picked the wrong woman. It was great.
Loved it.
I know. But from our perspective, from our podcast perspective, what we're looking for is, we want to know, can someone really convince a court that you're incapacitated, declare a legal guardian to act on your behalf, and then have this person take control of your entire life? I don't know, Chris, what do you think? Is that
heavy?
Something? Yeah.
I mean, and there's been stories about that. There's been stories. I had read an article, and it was, I think it happened a few years ago, where a gentleman, and not that there's fault, life happens, people get busy, but for whatever reason, he wasn't in great contact with his mom, and she was in Arizona. And the next thing you know, when he actually was able to make contact, she was in a facility. There was a guardian. I mean, so to me, I felt like, oh, that's like that movie. And I read it. I think it was a great article. I really have to dig that up. But that was a true story. And it was his plight of how he was supposed to get his mom back. Meanwhile, that guardian sold everything. I mean, it's just like the movie,
Yeah.
and I had a hard time finding that article in prep for this, but so it does happen, Chris. And I'm hoping it's more rare than common,
Mhm.
but I think, the system isn't perfect, right? There's a system in place.
Right.
And I think right now what we're trying to see, like, so in this movie, what can happen? Yes, there are systems in place where if someone can't manage themselves emotionally, intellectually, physically, financially, what can
Medically.
medically, big
Yeah.
deal. What do? We can't let these people just, not fend for themselves. There needs protection. So they have this procedure in New Jersey. It's called the guardianship, right? Where it is a procedure. So in the movie, that's right. There is court that's involved. Guardianships aren't dished out like a deck of cards. You really have to go through a procedure. Um, there are professional guardians that are around. If there's no one else who can step up to help our loved ones manage their affairs. And they do have total control of that person. And if they feel that person isn't safe in their home, they're going to relocate them in another place. And so in that way, the movie got it right. Procedure, there's a process, there's court, there are professionals involved to supposedly take care of you. And that facility where she's in, I mean, it's quite beautiful, I have to say. I looked at the room, that's a big room, like the room they put her in. I was
Yeah.
like, what's her name? Diane Wiest, I think that was the actress. Oh, she's so good. And I have to say, in the movie, the woman who plays Marla Grayson, I think she was so good. And forgive me if I don't remember her name. I'll look it up. But she was so good, so convincing. And on Netflix, she has another movie where she plays Marie Curie, the scientist.
Ah,
And it's so hard
yes.
to see her. It's so hard to see her in that because she's so rough and tumbling and mean in this I Care a Lot movie.
Oh, she
And
was
when I
ruthless.
think there were trailers, I saw Marie Curie. I'm like, hey, that's that same actress. I'm like, and she's so nice
I know.
and woman power, and yeah, I'm a scientist and I'm going to I'm going to do everything. But I had a little hard time looking at her that way. I'm just like, but I think you're still mean, but anyway, so yes, I think that's where they got it right. And guardians do get paid, right? That's
Right.
another thing that's accurate.
Absolutely. And they have full control of the assets. If that means that they have to liquidate, certain things like property, like a house, to make
Yeah.
sure that there's money to care for that person, that's what they have to do. That's normal.
Mhm.
But one thing, of course, that probably people are concerned about is, well, does that mean they pocket the money? No.
Right.
So at least I
That's where I
know.
think we started good. And I have to say, that's where I was getting confused in the
Yeah.
movies because, sometimes us knowing a little bit more,
Yeah.
when I saw her, like the money, I mean, and how the movie progresses into this huge empire and, it's this multi-billion-dollar business. I had looked it up. So in New Jersey, guardians get paid a commission.
Yep.
It's based upon what's in what they say, the corpus, so really what are we talking about with all the properties and everything? And there's a formula. So it's a certain amount times 0.005. So just for an example, if someone has a $3.5 million, they say estate, with all your assets involved, really in total, because there's actually a graduated formula and, I don't want to go into it, but I calculated last night. So a guardian annually with a $3.5 million estate will earn about $11,000 a year. That is like totally off base from when I saw the movie. This woman driving, what is it, Ferraris, Maseratis, and homes here and there. So I was like, how's that happening? Like, what? So to me, that's where it was inaccurate. But I guess, like you said, because, and the other thing that's inaccurate, I mean, guardians have to file an accounting. You have to account for where this person's money is going. So it just felt like that's not happening. I mean, if she's living high on the hog and, you know, living this wonderful corporate life and think, I'm like, how are we getting that past the goalie? How's the court approving some of these expenses?
Right.
So that's where I felt it was inaccurate. So, but I'm sure you also saw, Chris, just the whole process,
Right.
compared to how it's done here in Jersey. I mean,
Exactly.
like you said, you
It
were
was
mentioning,
missing, and in the whole court process where there's only one doctor speaking on behalf of, the ward, the potential ward. Normally in Jersey, you have at least two, not necessarily two independent, some people who are not, related to each other, but at least two doctors who are going to say that that person really does not have the faculties to take care of themselves. So I thought that was very odd. And this whole thing about, not allowing families to see them, not noticing other people, about the whole court process, that doesn't happen.
I know.
know?
Well, right. And so in a guardianship, there's the lawyer who's
Mhm.
making the presentation to say, we're presenting this petition to the court for the guardianship. Then there's a court appointed a lawyer to represent the ward, as they say.
Right.
So none of that happened in the movie.
None at all. There was
No lawyers involved. There were
there
no
were no
lawyers
lawyers
involved.
whatsoever. There's just a professional guardian, and there was nobody. Well, at some point, I think there was somebody appointed to the, well, not really appointed, because remember, there was that lawyer that came in and said he represented the elderly lady. I forgot her name, Diane Weiss. That's how I remember.
Yep.
And that, do you have a retainer agreement? That was the big question. And he's
Which
like, no,
was a
but if I
legitimate
could
question.
ask her-
Oh, I would get mad at that.
not letting them have access to the person, that's definitely fiction.
For sure.
There's a
For
process.
sure.
There's a process.
Yeah, I mean, in the movie, I mean, they did a great job of really like blocking out all path and making it sound like this woman was really pushed in the corner and that's it. And this is a horrible situation and you're kind of done.
Mhm.
But thankfully, here at least in New Jersey, there are avenues. There are, like you said, there's attorneys involved that'll come. And even if they say, they may argue that you don't have the capacity to hire an attorney. That's wrong as well. I mean,
Mhm.
for her, for the guardian to say that she's not allowing them to speak and to at least explore the idea of her having her own counsel, and the judge was agreeing with it. That was so. That was worthy.
Nope, that doesn't happen.
Yeah. So that's the other thing too. Yeah, I totally agree with that. And then of course, you see the heavy sedation that was going on with the people living in those facilities.
Right.
I mean, honestly, that was like my greatest fear because they wouldn't know. They're forcing you to take these things,
Right.
and then so you're at that point where you're heavily sedated and you can't speak and you can't explain your situation, and then it seems like this evil cycle of things just perpetuating and helping this woman make a great business in her mind. Oh, but
that was shocking, and that was so disturbing, from my perspective, because I'm like, oh my gosh, I do these guardians, that better not be happening.
Yeah, you're right. So I mean, so in the big picture, it was entertaining, it was great, fast moving. The ending was a little, again, not to spoil it for others who may not have seen it, but I guess in the end, people got what they got, but
Exactly.
it's how they're making this into it's a legitimate business,
Mhm.
but it just seems like it was so off the rails, out of control.
Mhm.
It could happen. It honestly could happen if we're not really focusing on the laws, because I mean, the guardianship laws haven't changed. I mean, they've been basically the same procedure for years. There have been some changes that I've been reading about, but they're not enough to make waves across the country. Like doesn't really make the news until we get to our next topic, but
Exactly.
but I care a lot. It was great. I had a good time watching it, but for everyone who's watching it, I know it's scary, but hopefully knowing that there are procedures in place. I mean, guardianships are not handled out, again, like candy. They should be a last resort. To me, I've only experienced situations where the courts have really taken it very seriously. They've really scrutinized the information. They really read everything. and they're not handed out very easily. In the movie, they made it look so easy that's what made it scary.
Exactly. And that's what people probably get most concerned about, as to how easily somebody could just all of a sudden take over their life without, much of, that thing called due process that we like to talk about as lawyers. So talking about, something that's more prevalent, something that's really in front of us right now, let's talk about Britney Spears.
Oh yeah.
That's an
Oh
interesting
yeah.
story, huh? Oh
Mm.
my goodness. So let's talk generally. Let's just here's a little bit of a summary on that. So, I was reading a couple of things, and basically here's how it started. 2008. Britney's father. We're gonna call him Britney's father because every time I say Jamie Spears, I'm like, who? I don't know who Jamie Spears.
Me too. I keep thinking it's her sister because she has a sister, Jamie Lynn.
Exactly.
And they'll say Jamie does this. I'm like, her sister did that.
You're so much better than me. I just knew daddy. Okay. So Britney Spears' father, he was granted conservatorship. That's what we call the guardianship in California. And this is after Britney kind of went off the edge, right? She was struggling with mental health issues. She was hospitalized. That whole thing about her carrying the kid in the car, without a car seat, and shaving her head. I don't know about shaving her head. That's totally normal. But anyway, that was showing that she was not in the right mind, right? So after she was, released from the hospital, court made the determination that dad was, he's going to be the conservator, and also gave a co-conservator power over her finances and medical decisions. So this is, the co-conservator was an attorney with the last name of Walker, I believe. Anyhow, so Jamie Spears' father, he was supposed to be watching over her estate and her physical well-being while the attorney Walker was, managing the finances. And so according to the LA Times, there's some documents that show that dad had so much power over her. He had the power to negotiate business opportunities, sell property, restrict her visitors. He could file restraining orders against those he believed were a threat to his daughter's stability. And he oversees much of all the little details of Britney's life. So every purchase she makes has to be logged into an annual court report of how she spent her money, little things like that. And so after 13 years, Britney now appeals to the court saying that she wants out. Okay. I think this happened sometime in April. At one point, though, it's interesting that the court-appointed attorney for Britney said she strongly opposed her father's position as the sole conservator of her estate and asked the court to limit his control. And her attorney at that time said she strongly prefers to have a qualified corporate fiduciary in the role, and she's made several attempts to do that. November 2020, judge granted her wish to appoint an outside financial group, a trust company, to be co-conservator. And she's requesting the court to remove her father to allow the trust company to be the sole conservator. I mean, these are things that she's doing step by step in the process to kind of slowly eliminate her father's control, over her.
Yeah.
She had a hearing not too long ago. I think it was in May or April. I think that's when it was. And she now asked the judge to end the abuse of conservatorship so that she can get married and have more kids. Didn't realize that he had control over
I know, but she already has 2 children. I mean, and she's helping, she's caring for them. She's a mom, and now you're saying no.
Yeah.
Okay. Anyway,
Interesting. And she wants to, end the conservatorship. Chris, there's one thing that she said there. She wants it to be done. She wants this done without having to be evaluated. So I don't know. What do you think? I personally have not had too many of matters where I had to terminate a guardianship. But what do you think about that? So what do you think?
Well, see, what's interesting is again, so in California, it's called conservatorship, which is in New Jersey, it's called guardianship. And it's meaning that you're appointing someone who can help you with everything, really, to manage your affairs, to do from, financial to medical and things like that. But what I did read is that that she did have someone else helping with her medical. It was a woman involved. So, and there were some issues about that.
Right.
But in order to terminate a conservatorship in California, and it's probably the same in New Jersey, you have to show evidence, show proof to the court that you're able to manage yourself physically, emotionally, medically, and financially. And you need to, show them that. And I would always hope that the court's focus is to help you gain your independence again, if you can. If, in this situation, why not? If she's this multi-billion-dollar, she's a headliner. She can, pull in the people when she creates things. She creates these dances and she's helping with music. And it's so hard for me to imagine, I think for anyone, that she's unable to manage all of it, and no one can. I mean, it's all, she's this multi-million-dollar industry in herself. She's an icon. So she is going to hire people to help her. She's not going to be sitting with her calculator saying, so what do we take in today? And what are our debts today? She's going to hire appropriate people to handle it. So I kept thinking, well, why isn't the court pare it down? Like instead of being full-blown conservatorship, can't we do limited? Let her deal with these other things. I mean, what's interesting is now, ever since this has been happening in the news, the corporate co-conservator stepped down. And then just last night, her attorney has now withdrawn, Stephen Ingham, he decided to step down, I think because of some of the things she stated in open court, that she feels that she was never given her full rights, that she can terminate the conservatorship. She hasn't been provided information how to do it. And that, I think as an attorney, would make me pause saying like, okay, we're having an issue here.
Right.
What was interesting is that early on, when the father was making the moves to be the full-blown conservator, she wanted her own attorney. She actually wanted to hire the cousin of Barbara Streisand, Adam Streisand. He stepped in, but Britney's father's lawyers questioned and said, does she have capacity to hire an attorney? And the court, I believe they entertained that argument. And I'm thinking like, yes, she has a right to hire an attorney. I mean, we had a case in our own file. This must have been a couple of years ago, Chris, where a woman had a guardianship in place here in New Jersey, and she wasn't happy with the guardian who she was working with. So she came to our firm and said, I really am questioning how the guardian is dealing with things. We're not communicating well. I'm not happy with him. What can we do? So she hired us. And the idea of, can she hire an attorney to do this? And yeah, she has rights, because I believe to show capacity in those situations, does she understand consequences? Does she understand what her options are, and that she's making thoughtful decisions for her, right? Just because she makes a decision and we don't like it doesn't make it wrong.
Exactly.
And I think that's where there's a disconnect. I don't know. That's what I'm thinking, Chris. So many layers that are frustrating for Britney's file, because you're thinking, she does have a right to her own attorney. So at that point, she never got, I thought that would have been so cool to have that cousin as your lawyer. I would want that, man. But he was out. And then, so now she ended up with Stephen Ingham, who, I don't know, when I read about how the conservatorship occurred, it was so quick. Like, I believe she was in the hospital at the time when it happened. And she had an episode. And again, at 2008, I do feel, Chris, since then, the understanding of mental health has evolved greatly. And I think at that time, there was still a stigma. I remember reading the news when she had shaved her head, how people were making fun of her. Instead of feeling compassion and thinking she's hurting, tabloids were all over it and just mocking, and, Britney's lost it. But how harsh, how hurtful. They would, hopefully we'll never see those headlines today. But when I remember going back in time, looking at them, like, oh my God. But here's something I wanted to bring up, because it occurred to me as I was just reading articles. There is a great article that came out, I believe, last week by Ronan Farrell, and he writes for the New Yorker. And I think his mom is Mia Farrell. And he writes this whole thing about Britney and a timeline. But he did make a point that early when when Britney's father, Jamie, was contemplating conservatorship, he reached out to the parents of Lindsay Lohan, because apparently they were thinking of conservatorship. And then Amanda Burns, that other actress, I believe they did get a conservatorship over her. But here's what's occurring to me, Chris. What is going on with women pop stars, where perhaps we're struggling, perhaps we're having, mental health issues, which is something that everyone goes through, that everyone's running to conservatorship? Where are the stories of the male pop stars who may be having the same problem and getting conservatorship over them? We're not making the news over them. Oh, as my video coaches. honestly, I was like, is it always have to be women? How come it's always women? I was reading
Maybe
it. I was
that's what's
getting
making the news
I
because
was getting very worked up. I'm like, I would love to see about the male pop star who cannot control, who needs a conservatorship, has, record-breaking tours in movies, top, number one bestsellers in books, but we need a conservatorship. I'm
right,
not sure. There is a big disconnect also with women and in this situation. I think
right. And again,
there's a stigma of out of control, can't handle it. So let's step in and take over everything.
oh, that's a good thing for our next podcast,
I'm
Chris.
so bothered with it. I have to tell you, I was, it hit me as I'm reading this, where I'm like, the father's talking to Lindsay Lohan's parents, like, Amanda Bier's, I'm like, okay, are there no men out there who have had these issues that
Mhm.
parents are coming and saying, let me do a conservatorship? Mm-mm. There's a stigma going on. That's my
There
feeling.
is definitely a stigma going on. And I think that's definitely something that we need to approach in our next podcast.
I think so too. It's
Yeah.
disturbing. But
Yeah.
for Britney's point of view, I mean, I really feel that now there's light being shown upon the system
Mhm.
that, again, we all know it's not perfect. Nothing's perfect. But when you have these glaring issues of what's going on with her, and you can't help reflect on what's going on with our clients when there is a time when they feel, do I still need this? Is this still necessary?
Right.
What can we prove? And you're right. She's saying she wants it without being evaluated, but I'm not sure what she means by it,
True. And
because
I don't think she's ever said that she didn't want somebody managing her affairs. But
right.
that's another story. She doesn't mind if she didn't say
Again,
anything about them removing that financial matter. But I think she's talking more about how he's a guardian of her as a person. And there's that difference between managing her estate versus being somebody who can control what kind of birth control you're on. I mean, there is all this talk, and of course, I don't always believe everything I see on the internet, but there's this talk about he tells her when having an IUD put in her, and I thought that was so too much. But technically, that's what a guardian can do. And
yeah.
many people don't really think about that there are no limits to what a guardian's power is, and that's why it's very important that when people come to that come to the decision about being somebody's guardian or pushing for guardianship of somebody, they know that it's not something they should be taking lightly also.
There was an early case, again, in my research, it was in 1928, and where a person had a guardianship and the parents wanted the person to, I guess in 1928, whatever the equivalent of having your tubes tied, basically the court agreed because, and it was terrible language. It's because apparently there was, they had a mental health issue that continued on from generation to generation. And the court said in very, I can't even say the words, but they just said, and we'll permit it because they can't let another generation go on with this condition. So they permitted it. But then there is a case that happened several years ago where a woman with Down syndrome, her parents similarly wanted to make sure that she cannot reproduce anymore. And the court stopped it because they said that that was beyond her civil rights. That was beyond permeating, violating privacy, violating her own rights and her due process of her. And that was her decision with her body. So interesting. So we have these competing
Yeah,
theories,
definitely.
I
Hopefully that one overturned the 1928 decision because
oh, terrible. Yeah.
it sounds
It's
terrible.
terrible. Yeah. It's hard, but I'm, every day there's something new at Britney. So I'm very eager to see more about what they're going to decide with her. I do feel that I don't know if they're going to totally get rid of it. I think they're going to give her a limited situation. I think they're going to pare it down and do it gradually.
I
I
agree.
just, that's the feeling I'm getting. I just think, you know, eh, I think, I just think to continue, there's just so much uproar, which is good because I think everyone's now looking into this area of law that really hasn't changed much. I mean, there's been, like I said, certain things that would happen, but they don't make the news, but this is making the news. So that's the good,
Yeah.
helping people. I think it would help for a moment. And when you do get a point when you can manage your fare, because isn't that the goal? There are
Right,
some
exactly.
situations we can't, but,
Exactly.
but when we can, you know, there has to be a better mechanism to evaluate and provide that freedom again.
Let's go.
But anyway, I just think that was, yeah, with Britney. So we'll see. But like I said, it's people are backing out. The the co-trustee, the corporate one backed out. Now her lawyer is withdrawing. So bring back Adam Streisand. That's all I say. I don't know. I just love that it's Barbara Streisand's cousin. I just think that's awesome. I think, anyway, that's my thing. But oh gosh, I think we have run our time.
Yes, we have.
We've run our time. So I think this was fun. I hope it was educational for our listeners, but I had a great time chatting about this, Chris. I think that was good.
I think these are so relevant now, and it's so important to review this area of law too. And I mean, it's not, and just to give people like the truth versus fiction. And I think that's, our culture is so, the pop culture permeates, what we see every day. And sometimes it's just good to get to step back and talk to people about what's real and what's not, because so often
hopefully
what
again,
makes money.
Yeah. And then hopefully also helping understand it a little bit better and seeing that maybe it's something that could really do good for a family member, or maybe not, maybe not, so good. All right, everyone. Well, everyone, thank you so much for listening on our first episode with Law and the Pop Culture Podcast. I'm Kristine Matus.
Kristine Carranceja-Gurski.
And thanks everyone for listening.
We'll be back soon. Take care.
Thank you. All right.